All right, Masego Sheburi is the Deputy Chief Electoral Officer of the Independent Elections Commission, and he joins us now via video link to unpack this report. Thank you so much, sir, for your time this afternoon. So as we get the highlights of the IEC's report on the 2024 elections, let's start with the comments that we've just heard now, the dangers of social media during the elections and how disinformation on social media was of grave concern to the IEC. What are some of your key lessons there?
Thanks, Sunati. Today, the Electoral Commission submitted its report to Parliament and by extension to the South African public. In it, we detail the areas of success that we recorded in the administration of the elections last year. We also raising alarm on areas that require our collective attention going forward. One of those being the use of artificial intelligence, the use of social media during election. We accept that new media has a place to play, has a place in the administration of elections, properly used. However, if it is not properly used and properly regulated, it has very deleterious effects for the administration of election. For example, the impersonation of parties, of candidates using artificial intelligence, and that may pass for most common people as real news when in fact it is not, it is mis or disinformation.
You've indicated the report also highlighted, several achievements. Perhaps speak to us about the successful integration of independent candidates into the national and provincial elections. Of course, we know how big a deal that was.
Yes, some of the key successes for last year's election is that we went into that election with the biggest voters' roll ever. We had 27.7 million registered South Africans on the voters' roll. Again, use of new technology in the form of online registrations enabled us to interact and register no fewer than 2.4 million South Africans. So the online facility provides ease of use, convenience, and people can use it from whenever they are at whatever time of the day. The second thing, as you've correctly pointed out, is that we have implemented a revised electoral system at very short notice to facilitate the ability of independent candidates to stand for election to the National Assembly as well as the 9 provincial legislatures. In the end, we facilitated the participation of 14,900 candidates who were competing for the finite 830 seats in the National Assembly, 400 and the 430 spread across the 9 provincial legislatures. The other area of success is that we continue to be true to our mandate. In other words, to extend access to a vote. In other words, how do we accommodate persons who, because of disability, infirmity, or absence from where they are registered, are unable to vote on voting day? 7% of all persons who voted in these elections are persons who voted by way of special votes. In other words, 2 broad categories: people who, because they were sick or infirm, could not come to voting station. We caused our staff to go visit them, and they voted in places of confinement. So 7% of all the registered voters, 7% of the 16.2 million persons voted by way of special vote.
When we consider, just some of the issues that arose during those elections, I mean, when you listen to some of the political parties, particularly independents too, there were concerns around your own information systems as well as voter management devices. What are some of the key lessons that can be drawn there in terms of next steps, especially looking at the elections ahead? What did your report focus on here?
The report looked at also at those areas where our performance were suboptimal. I can say without fear of contradiction that our candidate nomination system was not one of those areas. The area there was the inability of contestants to arrange their affairs before the close of candidate nomination. We've gone to court, and the court has vindicated the fitness of purpose of our result system. We, however, own up to a number of challenges in the ICT space. One was the 2-hour downtime on our result replication system. In other words, while we were still able to process the results, we were unable to project those results to people who were outside of the IEC environment, so for media as well as the leaderboard at the National Results Center. But that incident did not compromise the elections. It did not stop the process of collating result. We know what has gone wrong. We know the measures that we must implement to avoid replication. The second area was related to the use of what we call VMD, voter management devices. The device ran on 5 apps that are internally developed. On voting day, we ran 5 apps, and one of those apps, which is the Voters Roll app, performed suboptimally because it created duplicates of records and therefore slowed the speed at which it processed voter verification, thereby delaying voter verification time and resulting in queues in certain voting stations. Again, we have isolated the code error that was on the system, and steps have already been taken to ensure that we correct that code in going forward. For by-elections where we've had opportunity to test the system, it works like a charm.
And in terms, Mr. Sheburi, of just planning for next year's local government elections, where are you now? There were concerns, of course, earlier on about just on the appointment of new commissioners.
Indeed, the term of 3 commissioners come to an end in November this year. The Office of the Chief Justice, who is responsible for the recruitment process, have put the measures in place to ensure that there are interviews. In fact, the interviews are scheduled in the week of the 21st of July. Once that panel led by the Chief Justice does the shortlist, it will submit the names to the National Assembly. The National Assembly will vote on the names and forward those to the President for purposes of appointment and designating a chairperson and vice chairperson. It typically takes 18 months to prepare for an election. We are seized with preparations for those elections. The Municipal Demarcation Board, who must delimit wards ahead of each general election of municipal councils, is seized with that responsibility, and they will hand over the ward boundaries that will take effect on voting day to us in October this year, and that will mark in earnest the commencement for preparations for the elections that must take place no later than the end of January 2027.
Mr. Sheburi, thank you so much for your time. Masego Sheburi is the Deputy Chief Electoral Officer of the Independent Elections Commission. Of course, the IEC tabled its 2024 elections report in Parliament today.